Hi everyone. Let's have a look at some tactical positions. So here it's black to move, and black reasons that white is threatening a checkmate with queen to h6 followed by queen to g7 mate. So black thinks he has some time to make a threat of his own, and he plays rook to e8, threatening a back rank mate, but he overlooked white's actual tactic in the position. So try to find white's best continuation. Go ahead and pause the video. Okay, hopefully you found it, and we're going to try to talk through this without moving the pieces and practice our visualization skills. So white's best move is queen takes h7 check. Then black has two legal moves. If he moves the king to f8, then white can checkmate with either queen takes f7 or rook takes f7. After queen takes h7 check, if the black king takes the queen on h7, then white continues rook to h3 check. The black king has to go back to g8, it's the only legal move, and then rook to h8 is checkmate. Okay, so now let's play through it and see if that line made sense to you. So check. Here if he steps aside, we can mate on f7. If he takes the queen, we call check with the rook. King is forced back, and then we have a mate here on h8. Okay, let's take a look at the same tactical theme in a slightly more complicated setting. Have a look at this position. It's white to move and win. Try to find the best continuation. Go ahead and pause the video. Okay, we see a similar setup here. We have the bishop on the long diagonal. We have the queen ready to perhaps sacrifice itself on h7, and the rook is ready to come over to h3. Problem is the knight is in the way of the bishop, so we want to remove the knight with tempo. So white's best move is knight takes c6. Knight takes the knight on c6. Now the difficult thing about this puzzle is actually anticipating the possible defenses of black. Now after knight takes f6, black cannot take the knight back. If he plays knight takes c6, I should say. If he plays queen takes c6 or bishop takes c6, then we have the mate that we saw in the last tactic, beginning with queen takes h7 check, king takes h7, rook to h3 check, king goes to g8, and then rook goes to h8 with mate. So after knight takes c6, black can't recapture. But white is threatening two things. He's threatening to take the bishop on e7, and he's also threatening that tactical mate beginning with queen takes h7 check. So after knight takes c6, perhaps black's best try is to play his bishop to g5. That way he saves the bishop from the knight on c6 taking it, and the bishop can block a rook check from h3 by playing bishop to h6 at the right time. So how do we continue after knight takes c6 and then bishop to g5? Well, the best continuation there is knight to e7 check, and let's continue to discuss this without moving the pieces. After knight to e7 check, the black king has no legal moves because the long diagonal is open to the b2 bishop. So the knight on e7 must be captured. But if the bishop on g5 retreats to capture it, then we have that same tactical mate beginning with queen takes h7 check. So that leaves queen takes e7. Queen takes our knight on e7. Well, then our rook on e3 takes the queen on e7. Now that our rook is out of the way, the bishop on g5 can retreat and take the rook on e7 because white will not have the mate starting with queen takes h7 check. So it seems like at the end, black has a rook and a bishop for a queen and a pawn. So maybe he could fight on in that position. But actually, after the bishop takes the rook on e7, white has one final nail in the coffin. Do you see what it is? Okay, if you don't see it, let me run through the line again. So here's the line: knight takes c6, followed by bishop to g5, followed by knight to e7, followed by queen takes e7, then rook takes e7, then bishop takes e7. So after those moves, what's white's continuation? Okay, white's best move there is queen to d7, because that would fork black's two bishops. And white would pick up a piece, and he would have a queen and a bishop for a rook and a bishop. And that's a simple winning endgame. Okay, so now let's play it out. So knight takes c6. So the threat here, again, is taking on h7. King takes h7, rook to h3 check. King goes back to g8, and then the rook goes to h8 with mate, thanks to the help of the bishop. White is also threatening the bishop on e7. There are two pieces hitting that bishop. So one possible defense here is to remove the bishop from being attacked and plan to intercede on h6. So for example, the correct way to proceed here is not queen takes h7 check, as we saw in the last tactic. And that's because now after the king takes and the rook checks, the bishop can block. So that's what I was saying about that bishop move to g5. So instead, white plays this check, and since the bishop has this diagonal covered, the king can't move. Black has to take the knight. If he takes it with the bishop, then we have this mate again. The bishop was protecting against that mate. So he has to try taking with the queen, and then we take the queen, and black gets the rook. So he got a rook and a minor piece for his queen, but here's the final move that we mentioned. Queen to d7, forking the two bishops. So black's going to lose one of those bishops, and white will have an overwhelming material advantage. Okay, let's have a look at a different tactic now. In this position, it is white to move, and white can win. So pause the video and try to find the best continuation. Okay, hopefully you found a quick checkmate. And the move here is knight to f6 check. And I'm going to talk through it without moving the pieces. Now after knight to f6 check, black has two legal moves. If he moves the king to h8, then we have a queen takes h7 mate. And after knight to f6 check, if he plays pawn on g7 takes the knight on f6, then we can play queen to g3 check. King has to go to h8, only legal move, and then the bishop on b2 will take the pawn on f6, and that will be checkmate. Okay, so hopefully you can visualize that. Let's play through the moves now. So check. Notice we have a double piece attack here on h7. So if black moves the king, what we were saying is he can't do that without getting mated with queen takes h7. Okay, so if he tries taking the knight with the pawn, then we have this forcing move. King is forced to h8, and then we have checkmate. Okay, let's look at the same tactical theme in a more complicated setting. So have a look at this position, and again, try to anticipate all of black's possible defenses. So it's white to move, and white can win again. So pause the video and give it a try. Okay, hopefully you found the key move here is bishop takes the knight on d7. The purpose of that is we would like to enact the same tactic beginning with knight to f6 check, because if the pawn takes the knight, then we can play the rook to g3 check, and when the king goes to h8, we'd like to use the bishop to take the pawn with checkmate, just like before. The problem is, not only is the pawn defending f6, but so is the knight. So white wants to remove that defender of f6. So the key move here is bishop takes the knight on d7. Now, after that knight is gone, white is now threatening that mate, beginning with knight to f6 check. But he's also threatening the queen and the rook on e8. He's forking those two heavy pieces. So it looks pretty hopeless for black. But let's consider two responses. For example, if black tries a counterattack after bishop takes the knight on d7, what if black tries bishop takes the knight on e4, leaving his queen hanging, but at the same time attacking our white queen and getting the knight back? Do you see what white's follow-up would be? Okay, white would win there by playing queen to c3, removing his queen from threat, and now white has two threats. He's threatening a checkmate, he's got a battery lined up on the long diagonal, and he's still threatening the queen on c8. So black can't protect against both of those threats. Okay, so that's why bishop takes the knight on e4 would not work as a defense after bishop takes d7. What if he tries to save his queen by moving his queen to d8, which now also protects f7? Well, in that case, we can actually play the bishop takes the rook on e8, and we're going to go up a piece in that line because we just took the knight and the rook, and black can recapture the rook with rook takes e8, but he'll be a piece down. We'll have a bishop and knight and rook and queen, and he'll just have the bishop and rook and queen. So we'll be a piece up, and that should be an easy win. Okay, and perhaps the main line after bishop takes d7 is what happens if he just takes the bishop with the queen. Queen takes d7. Well, then we continue on with that mating idea we saw in the last position. We play knight to f6 check. Pawn takes f6, otherwise the queen is going to mate on h7. And then the rook slides over to g3 and calls check. The king is forced to h8, and then finally the bishop takes the pawn on f6 for mate. Okay, so hopefully you could visualize all of that. Now let's play through the moves and see what we're talking about. So that's the key move, threatening the queen and the rook. And I'm going to turn the sound off here. And threatening to play knight to f6. So we mentioned that taking this knight and counterattacking our queen doesn't work, because when we slide the queen over to c3, we've got this battery, we're threatening mate on g7, and simultaneously we're still threatening his queen. Okay, so another thing we mentioned that doesn't work is the queen moving to d8 to save the queen and protect that square. But white has a simple move here, just taking the rook, and even if black recaptures the bishop there, notice the queen is still defending f6. White's just a piece up in the position. Okay, and if after bishop takes the knight, black goes ahead and recaptures, trying to stay ahead material, then we've got knight to f6 check. And if the king goes to h8, we've got this mate. So if he takes with the pawn, we've got this check, king goes in the corner, and then the bishop takes the pawn for mate. Okay, hopefully you found this visualization and tactical practice useful. If so, leave me a comment and I can make more of these videos. Thanks very much for watching.